John Bolton is former Trump's national security advisor. Welcome to our program, Ambassador Bolton.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Russia has attacked a NATO member country, Poland, with more than 19 long-range drones. This is the first time when NATO member has engaged in intercepting Russian assets. Was Vladimir Putin testing NATO's and Donald Trump's resolve?
Well, I think that's the only conclusion you can draw. I don't buy the argument that 19 of these drones malfunctioned purely coincidentally from an attack that was supposedly directed against Ukraine. I think ever since the Alaska summit, Putin has acted like he has a totally free hand in Ukraine, and I think he sees an opportunity to test NATO to see if it will respond to this kind of provocation. And I think Poland did the right thing in invoking Article 4 of NATO. It's a threat to its independence and national security. So now we'll see how NATO responds. And I think this is, at an absolute minimum, a very clear indication that that significantly enhanced sanctions against Russia are needed, and that the sanctions that are in place be toughened up and strictly enforced. This is not a moment to hesitate, because I think it will simply encourage Putin if there's a weak response.
Do you see this so-called Trump's policy on Ukraine and also Alaska summit how emboldened Putin to attack NATO in such way, or could there be another reasons of this?
Well, the Russians, of course, have denied that it was deliberate. They've said it was a miscalculation. It's certainly the case that weapons can go astray, but this kind of pattern makes it very hard for that argument to have credibility. And I do think the Russians saw an opportunity with the reaction to the Alaska summit, with no real coherent response by the alliance as a whole. A lot of threats, no action, and real uncertainty in the West as to how to proceed to deal with Russia's continuing unprovoked aggression. I think when Putin had the opportunity to go to China for their massive propaganda display about how World War II ended in the Pacific and to project Chinese power, the fact that Prime Minister Modi of India joined that meeting, Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. I think Putin felt emboldened by that, and I think this attack on Poland was the result. So Putin will obviously watch NATO's reaction very carefully, and that's why it's even more important than it otherwise would be that this response by NATO has to be very strong. It has to be clear to Putin that things have changed. This is not just a one-time change, but this should really energize NATO to say, you know, we've got to get more serious here about rolling back Russian advances inside Ukraine, because Putin won't negotiate as long as Russian troops are moving forward. When they start moving backward, that'll get his attention.
From your perspective, how should NATO react to this escalation? By enforcing, for example, a no-fly zone over Ukraine to also protect Ukrainian civilians and try to intercept Russian assets before they enter Polish airspace, for example?
Yeah, you know, as I'm sure all your viewers know, there was talk of a no-fly zone in Western Ukraine at the very beginning of the war, and that was rejected for fear of NATO planes and personnel coming into direct conflict with Russians. Well, that day has arrived, and it wasn't because of anything NATO did, it's because of what the Russians did. So I think because the Russians have demonstrated over the last 3.5 years, almost 4 years now, that they're perfectly ready to attack civilian targets, that a no-fly zone could be one response. I think going back to the question of shipping in the Black Sea, that was another area that was talked about as saying that's hands off the Russian Black Sea fleet. I think that's something else we should consider too.
From your perspective, if NATO and President Trump don't respond to this escalation by Vladimir Putin, could Putin attack NATO again in other way?
Well, I think Putin is a very careful chess player here. He's going to see what the reaction to this incursion into Poland is. He may try something else, maybe a cyber attack on the Baltic republics, which the Russians have done before. But he, from everything we can see, Putin, the Kremlin, the Russian government feel very emboldened these days. They got through the Alaska summit. There were no negative consequences for them. The president dropped his insistence on a ceasefire. He still hasn't sanctioned Russia. He still hasn't sanctioned China for the sale of Russian oil and gas. Only India, which is very hard to understand. Certainly, the Indians are not at all happy about it. So the incursion into Poland is a wake-up call for NATO, and if it doesn't provoke the appropriate response, there's no doubt Putin will push further.
And don't you think that this incursion into Poland's airspace or attack by the Russian side aimed to prevent Trump from imposing secondary tariffs on Russian goods, Russian economy and other countries, because there were new discussions on this matter between American and European officials?
Yeah, I think Putin sees or senses disunity. European governments have their own trouble. The government of France is in now picking its fifth prime minister in 2 years. The government in Britain is having difficulties. So when you have somebody in the White House like Trump, who's as erratic as he is, and disunity in Europe, I think Putin sees opportunities to take advantage of the alliance, and he's testing just how far he can go. It just underlines, again, as we've been discussing, why a strong response to the Polish incursion is so important.
From your perspective, what are the risks for a wider war in Europe between Russia and NATO?
The risks here are being caused entirely by Russia. And for 3.5 years, this fear of a wider war, I think, deterred the U.S. in particular and NATO from formulating a strategy for victory, not just to prevent Ukraine from losing the war, but to allow Ukraine to win the war. And again, it seems to me that this most recent incident underlines why the policy of restraint that we've been following has failed, because it has not met with corresponding behavior by Russia. When the West is restrained, the Russians advance. And I think the corollary to that is when the West says we simply don't accept that kind of behavior, that's when Russia falls back.
Also, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Sunday that he's ready to move to the so-called, quote, second stage of sanctioning Russia. What does this mean, and do you expect President Trump to do this?
Well, that's what he should do, certainly. He's got strong support in Congress to do it. The attack into Poland just underlines the imperative of acting very, very firmly. So this is a real testing point for everybody. If we don't get a strong response here from NATO allies, I think it will simply encourage Russia to take some other offensive action elsewhere.
However, the Kremlin said on Monday that no sanctions would even force Russia to change its course in the war against Ukraine, according to Reuters. Do you also think so, that this won't work with the Russian side?
Well, I think they're putting on a very aggressive front. They want to show they're confident. And based on the recent history over the past several months, they have every reason to be confident, since the White House has not carried through on its threats, and Russia's military continues to grind out advances, limited advances, but still advances at a very high human cost. So the record in front of Putin doesn't give him any cause to be concerned. Unless we do give him reason to be concerned, we're simply going to face more of this kind of belligerent behavior.
Do you feel that now President Trump has realized that he has been played by Vladimir Putin? It has been a while since the last phone call between Trump and Vladimir Putin. Do you expect another phone call in the nearest future, or President Trump just decided to move forward with this matter, to walk away, or just to impose some sanctions and change his focus on other matters, issues?
Well, I think it's hard to say how Trump is reading it at this point. I mean, it is he has been played. I think most of the world sees that. He may not see it that way, but I think in Putin's mind, he's getting his way. So why not continue the behavior that produced what for him is a favorable outcome until Trump changes course very dramatically, not just vague commitments of more sanctions, but concrete action. I don't think Putin will change his behavior, and that's what we're worried about.
And could President Trump just walk away from negotiations at this point, from your perspective?
Yeah, yes, he could. I mean, I think he senses failure. He's failed over 7 months to bring the conflict to a conclusion, and for him, almost any conclusion would be acceptable, not necessarily one favorable to Ukraine. So when he's confronted with this, he doesn't like to dwell at the scene of the failure, and I do think that there's a risk that he'll propose some relatively minor sanctions on Russia and then walk away. So it's very important to emphasize again that this new incursion into Poland really is proof of just how determined the Russians are.
Also, recently there have been meetings between American and Belarusian officials, and the U.S. Is getting ready to lift sanctions against the Belarusian state airline Belavia, and this is so-called first step in normalizing relations between the U.S. and Belarus. What is your assessment of this Trump's strategy to normalize relations with Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko?
Well, I think it's a mistake at this point. I think there's utility in trying to take whatever steps might be possible to pry Belarus away from Russia. I visited Minsk in 2019 in early September to do exactly that, to begin the conversation. But at the moment, where Belarus is a partner to the Russian aggression against Ukraine, I don't think lifting sanctions just as a goodwill gesture makes any sense.
Do you think that Trump's team, they're hoping just to use Belarus and to try to take any leverage over Belarus to get any kind of help for negotiations to get this war settled?
Well, I think there's something to that, and as I say, I think just given the geography of Belarus vis-a-vis Ukraine and Poland, I'd much rather see them on our side than on the Russian side, but that's a lot easier said than done.
Also, U.S. Special Envoy Kit Kellogg today is visiting Kyiv again. He will meet with the Ukrainian officials. Do you feel that Kit Kellogg's voice in the White House still have any kind of sense for President Trump?
Well, I'm afraid not. I wish he were in Washington today, honestly, rather than Kyiv, to urge a stronger response. But perhaps he'll carry a message back from Zelensky and the Ukrainian government. That could be helpful.
And do you feel that Trump's team is still trying to force Ukraine to surrender Donbas region to Russia? There have been such discussions after this meeting in the Oval Office between President Trump, Zelensky, and European allies. It seems for some people that maybe European allies were successful in changing Trump's mind on this matter.
Well, I think Trump has a very simplistic view of what the issues are between Ukraine and Russia. It's just a matter of a few square miles here or there. He doesn't appreciate that what Putin wants is the recreation of the Russian Empire, and he wants Ukraine to be a part of it. That's not something you can compromise on.
Let's also cover this big military parade in China. You also covered this matter in one of your answers. Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Russian dictator Putin, and North Korea's Kim Jong-un stood together publicly, participated in this big military parade. And I would like to begin this topic with this really interesting conversation between Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un about the possibility of living to 150 years. What does this indicate? Does this indicate that they are not ready to go somewhere else, to go away from their posts?
No, I mean, this is what dictators dream of, I suppose, and it was interesting that they ended up talking to it. But it was clearly an effort to show a projection of Chinese power. I think Xi Jinping succeeded in that, and I think from Putin's point of view, it was to show China still in this what they themselves once called a partnership without limits, as a signal to Ukraine and the West as a whole. So that to me is just further evidence of why, looking at the incursion into Poland's airspace, the West needs to counter this and needs to counter it very strongly.
Do you feel that Trump's failed policy on Ukraine just emboldened China to organize this parade with other dictators?
Well, I think they were going to do it regardless of what Trump's policy was, because they wanted to show China as a stable alternative to the U.S. for world leadership. And unfortunately, Trump gives them opportunity to do that. But I don't think there should be any misunderstanding. I think China and Russia are working hand in glove here for Russia to succeed in its aggression against Ukraine.
Let's cover also this interesting topic regarding tariffs against India. Economy, you have been saying that there are pros and cons of this decision, because on the one hand, it is important to put pressure on Russia to deter Russia from selling its oil and gas. On the other hand, such move could also make this alliance between India and China even more stronger. What is your assessment of this strategy, and does President Trump have enough keys to exert pressure on Russia, deter Russia from selling oil and gas, and also to maintain close relations with India?
Well, I think it's going to require more thinking that he's put into it. It's certainly complicated. India has long-standing ties dating back to the Cold War with Russia, both on sophisticated weapon systems and on economic matters. And I think putting the secondary tariffs on India, but not putting any tariffs on Russia itself, and not putting any tariffs on China, which purchases a lot more Russian oil and gas, did hurt the cause of bringing India away from Russia and away from China. The fact is that sanctions on Russian oil and gas exports are poorly written. I think this whole idea of a price cap under which it's permissible for some countries to buy Russian oil was a mistake. I think if we want to prevent Russia from earning money to finance the war through sale of hydrocarbons, we should just say we object to the sale of all of them. And, that may cause rises in gasoline prices in the West, but, how serious are we about stopping this aggression?
And do you feel that Trump also have another options to put more economic pressure on Russia?
Sure, I think there are a lot of options, and I think enforcement of the existing sanctions could be tightened very substantially. That in and of itself would be a major change.
Ukraine has destroyed 20% of Russia's oil refining capacity, according to the White House assessment. What is your assessment and take on this new Ukraine's sanctions against Russian economy?
Well, I think the Russian economy is suffering, that's for sure, but not enough. And in a war of attrition against a smaller country like Ukraine, and given that in Russia there aren't exactly consumer and democratic voter protests that influence decision making in the Kremlin, much more has to be done. And both in terms of stabilizing the Ukrainian economy on one side and putting more pressure on Russia on the other.
Thank you, Ambassador Bolton, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much. Always glad to be with you.